Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We've got a really special guest today, people, two actually. Let me first introduce my friend and colleague, AL.com life and culture writer, Matt Wake. Matt, great to have you with us. And joining us today, a New York Times bestselling critic, journalist, and author. His books include Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs, a Low Culture Manifesto, But What If We're Wrong? Thinking About the Present as If It Were the Past, and the 90s. His latest book from Penguin Random House is Football. It releases January 20th. Already named the most anticipated book of 2026 by NPR. You have read his work on Esquire, ESPN, New York Times Magazine. You've heard him on the Bill Simmons Podcast. A self-proclaimed football psychotic, a description that we all know too well here down in Alabama. Chuck Klosterman, welcome, sir. We're huge fans.
Well, hey, it's great to be here. So this is an Alabama-specific podcast?
Yes, this is all about Alabama.
So okay, the state of Alabama, or just Alabama? Like, you cover Auburn as well? Anything in Alabama? Like, or is it just the Crimson Tide?
Well, this show covers the Crimson Tide, right?
Okay.
AL.com covers Auburn, sure, but this show covers Auburn
that's
through a certain lens.
Okay,
yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's great to have you, Matt. Go for it.
Hey, Chuck, football. Smart, funny, your unique analysis. The deeper I got into the book, I had to make myself slow down reading like I was eating a really good pizza. The chapter on greatest of all time, GOATs. You talk about Jim Thorpe. You talk about Tom Brady. You mentioned in passing people in Alabama will be familiar with, super familiar with, Derrick Henry, Cam Newton, and how people like Tom Brady and Jim Thorpe would fare in reversed eras. You also write about Nick Saban in this book, Chuck. And I guess my question is, do you think Nick Saban would have had as successful Bama run if he had started now in NIL in the portal era, a young Nick Saban?
Well, I don't, okay? Because this NIL portal stuff has changed things, I think even more. Like, we're starting to just recognize it now, how much, like, everyone knew it would be different, but I think it's different in ways that maybe some people did not suspect. I do think, and I might have been one of these people, is that at the very early stage of this, I think there was this idea, well, this is probably going to take the teams that are already dominant and make them more dominant. That the 20 or 25 programs that have sort of defined college football or college basketball, whatever sport you're using, over the past 50 to 100 years, this is going to really play to their advantage. And it clearly has not. One of the things that is so kind of, I guess, fascinating about Indiana now is that what we're realizing is that the skill that their coach has is talent evaluation, being able to see players as not just good or bad, but like as a bargain, what their value is for building depth and whatnot, what guys to bring from James Madison, all these these things that seem obvious now, but they weren't really at the front of people's mind when this came in. I think that at the front of people's mind was going to be like, okay, so when the next Tim Tebow comes up, what will be like the bidding war for this kid or whatever? How much money will these be able to make in college? Maybe it'll keep kids in college longer. For someone like Nick Saban, one of the things that was among his so many fine qualities is one is he was the kind of guy who could go into someone's kitchen with the player and their parents and sort of describe to them, okay, like if he comes to Alabama, maybe he won't play for 2 years, but when he plays that third year, he's going to have this sort of rarefied experience, and I'm going to mold him into a different kind of person, and I will make sure he goes to class and all of these things. And I see maybe like the kind of person you can trust, that my force of personality and charisma is like part of the reason why I'm sitting at this table with you and you're going to want to come with me. Now, that same thing might happen, but the mother might be like, well, okay, but A&M offered $450,000. So what is your offer? Like, it has completely eliminated these ideas of the intangible things a coach could bring to the table. It's also going to change and has changed. The ability of a team to build a super deep roster with really strong special teams, in the sense that it would be possible for a kid who aspires to play in the NFL, say a linebacker. He might be like, well, if I go to one of these SEC powerhouses, all I have to do is get on the field in any capacity. I can then get to the combine and maybe make it then, So I'll go to Alabama and win a national championship, or I'll go to LSU and challenge for a national championship or whatever. That'll be part of my experience, and I will bring that to the table. Now it's more like, well, you can kind of go anywhere, make real money. Even if you don't go to the NFL, you got to kind of maximize what you can make in the short term, and you'll be more visible because you can go to, say, you go to Oregon State or whatever and get in the field right away. And I think the thinking from the NFL perspective now is that they're less interested in your collegiate performance and more in the specific tools you physically offer. And that takes an advantage away from the great coaches, particularly coaches. And, Saban was one of the last sort of kind of remnants of the past, when his selling point was sort of the experience of being with him specifically, which I don't think matters now. I mean, I do think that a coach, like Lane Kiffin, is much closer to the kind of coach that will be successful going forward than someone like Saban.
Yeah, it's a great point, because if Nick Saban was still here and Alabama was still struggling with NIL the way that they currently are, they would have to rely on the idea that you can have long-term success and financial stability if you play for Nick Saban, instead of the instant money you'd be able to get if you signed with Alabama, which they can't provide compared to Oregon and compared to these other big programs. But, you call NIL a sensible modification that was immediately misused. You said that the introduction of the transfer portal and NIL, they kind of push college football in a more professional direction, and you call them a depressing shift that works to a sport's short-term benefit. And I think everybody pretty much agrees with you in that we're kind of already there in terms of college football becoming more of a feeder system for the NFL. But Alabama was that for a little while. And I want to stick with Nick Saban for a minute, Chuck. He comes up quite a bit in the book. You called Saban benching Jalen Hurts for Tua Tagovailoa in 2018 the gutsiest coaching decision that you've ever witnessed. You said at the time it felt unthinkable. And then you also write that Saban and Bill Belichick are so funny despite seeming humorless. And you say Saban, along with Belichick, is your favorite personality in all of football, at least for the last 20 years. If you could distill it into one thing, Chuck, what is it that really fascinates you about Nick Saban?
One thing. Well, I think, it is sort of the dichotomy between the fact that he so much embodies the most sort of traditional, conventional, conservative ideals of what football was from the time when he played and even before that, but also his strange desire to be on television. His willingness to be in these commercials with Deion Sanders that seem really outside of his personality, right? He has an understanding that he is funny. That's sort of what is, I think, makes him maybe a little different than Belichick, is that he really knows he's funny. When he's giving a press conference and he's telling the reporters, like, ask this bottle of Coke questions. That will be the quality of answers you'll get from me. They'll be the same thing. Like, he knows how that is going to come across, but he never breaks character. Like, he stays in this, he sort of stays in this, I guess when I say character, it's almost like this caricature of how we imagine a football coach is supposed to be like. And plus, I found every story he tells to be entertaining. Every story he tells about his dad, and the girl breaks up with him, so he goes to work at the garage, and it's all these things. It's like he's a fun person to listen to. And, he is, you see footage of him at practice, he was an abrasive person, he was a yeller and all of these things. And somehow it didn't feel the way, like, say, Brian Kelly felt or whatever. Like, it didn't seem that way. Now, I remember one. I'm not giving you one example. I'm giving you many. But I think there was a story about him in GQ or Esquire or something, and he's driving the car, and like they're listening to classic rock or something, and the people are just kind of making conversation about like, different bands and stuff, and somebody says something somewhat like kind of makes a joke about the Rolling Stones, and like he looks over his shoulder and he's like, Rolling Stones are a great fucking band. There's like he's like in this thing that they're like, people are having a fun time, and then all of a sudden he gets really serious about this completely disconnected thing in his life. So I don't know what it is. I think it was just that, like a lot of people, I bet you guys have the same way. Like a lot of times you get in these text relationships where you just text about, college football, and the group I'm in, we just loved anything involving Nick Saban. Anything about him was entertaining to us. And I guess what makes it also easy to like a guy like that is the team was also super successful. So it wasn't this entertaining thing, and you're like, well, he's really kind of funny and kind of goofy and strange, and I guess it does, like it also paid off with this kind of dynastic run. So I mean, I don't know. I love listening to him talk. I love the sound of his voice.
Yeah, Chuck, you mentioned the Stones, and not to be too on the nose, wearing the hat and everything, but in rock groups, I tend to like bands like the Rolling Stones or Humble Pie, even though I like bands like Rush or Yes or Steely Dan. I like the imperfections. I like the jagged edges. And I like college football better than NFL because of that, too. I like the imperfections and the jagged edges. But also, I like that as an Alabama graduating fan, and so I watch mostly Bama games and SEC games, the teams still had the same uniforms when I was a kid, checking out books from the library about Steve Spurrier and the Florida Gators. Like NFL, it seems like they are getting Call of Duty more and more kind of uniforms. And whenever an NFL team wears a throwback jersey, I like watching the game better. I mean, Keith Richards once said, "The eyes are the whores of the senses." Great quote. But like, why don't NFL teams go back to the classic uniforms? Steelers, Cowboys, 49ers, Sub, Bears, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying this because in the book you also touch on some college teams you love, like their uniforms, like Ole Miss, LSU, and you give Alabama backhanded compliments with the dismal crimson.
I typically do not like monochromatic uniform. I don't like teams that typically only have one color with white. I always think that accent color is better. But with Alabama, I give them a little break because they put the numbers on the sides of the helmet, and I think that just looks. I mean, that looks old to me. The uniform thing is interesting. Everyone when an NFL team wears throwback jerseys, everyone likes that. And to the point where people are like, why don't they just stay with these? And the thing is, it's antithetical to the way pro football operates. Pro football operates from a position that we are moving forward, we are advancing, and we are getting bigger. It does not have a regional quality. It does not really have the same kind of historical quality. I mean, the idea that, say, if someone said, if we were in Louisiana and we were like, so who are the greatest players in LSU history? Somebody might say Billy Cannon first. Okay. Like that might be the first name they would say. Okay. Whereas with an NFL team, they're just like, we're all kind of like, prisoners of the moment. I mean, outside that, they might say, maybe a Browns fan might say Jim Brown. But I think if you asked a Cowboy fan now, somebody in their 30s or whatever, it would be unlikely that they would say Troy Aikman or Emmitt Smith or something like that. They would not go back to Staubach or all these things. And the Billy Cannon example, I said, like, I feel like you could hear that from like a 21-year-old person, because the idea of the history of college football really is a big part of its richness. I mean, it's a strange thing. Just using Alabama as example, I remember when it was really, this is going to make me seem like 1,000 years old, but like when Ray Perkins was the coach and Alabama was down, and it was kind of it was the post Bear Bryant era, and it seemed like Ray Perkins should be an NFL coach. He shouldn't be doing this. It's not going to work. It somehow seemed embarrassing that he was coaching Alabama. And this is not a criticism of the guy, even. Like, I was too young to really have a good analysis of his coaching acumen, but it didn't seem right to me. It seemed weird. It seemed like a cheap thing. So now when I think of the history of Alabama football, there's the Bear Bryant era, and then there's this whole weird middle period when they were actually kind of down in the 80s and stuff. I don't think of NFL teams in that same way. Sometimes I do because, obviously having done this book, like the history of football is I'm particularly interested in. But when I'm thinking of, say, the Chargers, I'm kind of thinking of who they are now. Maybe, when I first got into football, it was Dan Fouts who played for him and John Jefferson and Chuck Muncie. But I don't think of them as having this long sort of arc where all of the steps along the way matter. Where in college, that's still true, people sometimes try to argue with me about why do you still prefer college football to pro football? College football is becoming more professional. It's a lesser version, a lesser vintage of the sport. And, it's just an interesting thing. It's like when you watch, say, Stanford play Mississippi State, you're kind of rooting for or against the kind of person you imagine going to that school, even though among the football players, it's not really true. Like, there are football players for Stanford who could never go to Stanford, right? There are players for Mississippi State who are there who could have gone to Stanford academically, but they had a chance to play football in the SEC. But you sort of think of their fan base, the culture of the town, and all these things, like the whole Auburn, Alabama thing. It's really interesting in how that there is a psychological break between those two programs when I'm not saying the people are all the same, but they're more similar than a lot of other rivalries, like the pure geographic distance between them is not that great. It's kind of like the same thing with in basketball with Duke and North Carolina. Seem like completely disparate programs, and yet the people from those two programs are essentially neighbors, and they're the same kind of person. And the thing that sets them apart is this intellectual relationship with this program,
Chuck, we'll ignore that you called Alabama as a dismal shade of crimson, right? You said that they do compensate with the numbers on the side.
Their colors aren't great. Like, I love Alabama. I root for them all the time. Their colors are not great. I don't.
Let me go back to what you just said, though. You say you root for them all the time, right? Because, you're somebody who has watched a ton of football in your life. You've written a whole book about it, right? But you grew up very far away from this place. When did you take such an interest in Alabama and the SEC? Like, was it just because it was the best college football product at the time and you latched on at the right time? Or, you've watched football most of your life. What was it about Alabama that struck you?
Well, okay. I'm the seventh kid in my family. And I had two older brothers and then my father, And so we're in North Dakota. The primary rooting interest for us is North Dakota State from Fargo, right? We don't really care about the Minnesota Gophers at all because they're terrible. We care about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, which somehow seem regional, even though it's 2 states away. But just from listening to my dad and my older brothers talk, it was always understood that the best football was in the southeast part of the country in Texas. Those were where the good football players were. So there was never, I have no memory of a time of realizing or being taught or learning that SEC football is sort of like the top of this pyramid. It's something I just have always known my whole life. So I think my initial interest in the SEC, I like one of the first years I really followed, college football. Clemson won the national title, and I almost, even though they were in the ACC, I almost associated in some ways it seems like Clemson should be in the SEC. Like I know it's, and that's a weird thing to say because I'm also somebody. It's like the way things are how it is, So Vandy's got to be in there, But sometimes I used for a long time I was like, it would make so much more sense if it was Clemson and not Vandy. Now Vandy's good, so I liked Clemson when I was real young, I even though they weren't in the SEC, I kind of lumped him in there. In the same way that I remember Deion Sanders as a college player. So I was, these are ACC schools, but like to me, they're close. There's like, it's like from being in North Dakota, those are kind of in the same region. But then when I got a little more sophisticated, I think that it was the history of Alabama and the history of Georgia. I also really vividly remember like the Herschel Walker era. And I think that if at that point, if you would ask me who my favorite SEC team is, it would have been, I probably would have said Georgia. And then, there was a period with Florida and there was a period with, LSU and stuff. Alabama, I guess, to me was always like, for a long time, I guess I just saw them as, kind of the consensus understanding of the best program in the conference. And then all the other teams were sort of like trying to knock them off that position. Like when Bo Jackson was at Auburn, like that was a chance for Auburn to maybe finally move across Alabama. And some situations are like that, where there's like, even if it, you see this a lot in high school football, where there'll be one high school, which over say a 40-year span will have won the conference 25 times. But the interesting years are the 15 years they don't, when they finish second or whatever. I always sort of thought of Alabama in this way. But then when Saban went to Alabama, he was real criticized for the way he left the Dolphins and all that, so I didn't know really how I felt about him. I remembered him from Michigan State and all, I remembered him from LSU. But I think something that may have been Saban's entry in Alabama may have been, I think, maybe the beginning of my old man phase, when I suddenly cared about coaches much more than players. Like I think that's just the nature of growing old. It's like like in basketball, man. I remember at one point it was like the only guy who still left is Jim Boeheim. He's the only guy who was coaching when I started. I think it was after Krzyzewski left. I was like the only. The only guy who was coaching when I started following this is him. I think that relationships to coaches, because coaches are programs. It's like that's also, I think, it's like if you think of the Georgetown basketball program, like you think of John Thompson. When you think of the Boston Celtics, you think of Larry Bird. Like pro teams are built around the player, college programs are built around the coach. So I think that just that the program of Alabama and the existence of Saban, to me, are completely interlocked intellectually.
Chuck, one of your gifts as a writer is for, and you sort of started a trend of making pop culture comparisons and references. In this book, you talk about Deep Purple, Tony Soprano, Aleister Crowley, Saturday Night Live, Cookie Crisp cereal, Mitch Hedberg, among others. And you have this right balance of not go into that too often. And since this year is also the 25th anniversary of Fargo Rock City, which to me is the best book ever written about rock
Thank you.
and
I
roll.
appreciate you saying that. I know you. Yes, thank you very much for saying that. They're releasing an anniversary issue of that this summer, actually.
Yes. So off of that and back to the new book, Football, one of the themes you dig into is, will football ever be outlawed? It's very dangerous, very popular. So that made me, with the 25th anniversary of Fargo Rock City, think about, I know something else that used to be very dangerous and very popular that hasn't been outlawed, but I think of the hard rock rogues like Guns N' Roses, songs about drunk driving, glamorizing heroin use, artwork depicting a robot racist, the song One in a Million. I don't think there will ever be a huge new dangerous rock band. And I think that's a underrated reason why rock, there's a lot of them. I could do a whole podcast on it, but why rock will never, ever be massive again, because the coolest rock bands were the dangerous ones in society today, business today. dangerous rock bands like Guns N' Roses, it's not going to happen. What do you think about that?
Well, no, I agree with you, although for a slightly different reason. Like there will never be a hugely popular, controversial rock band because it's hard to imagine there being enough huge rock bands to have one be particularly controversial. Like, it's hard. There is, like Guns N' Roses was an example you used. So Guns N' Roses comes out of the situation when there are many bands who are huge, many of whom are like kind of like trying to push the envelope in some ways, Motley Crue and whoever you want to look at. And then Guns N' Roses went further. Like they had a little more talent and were just a little more also willing to sort of marginalize themselves in this way. So I think I agree with you. Now, but could there be that kind of person in the idiom of, say, female pop? That's like the dominant form now. You got Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo and Sabrina Carpenter and Chapel Roan. And could there be could Chapel Roan, for example, become the Guns N' Roses of this? If she took some I don't know, like she would suddenly like really pro ice or something that would just outrage her fans or something, maybe. But I feel lucky that I got to experience rock when it was the center of popular culture, and now it never will be again. And it really hasn't been since the middle 90s. I don't think we recognized it until the 2000s, but things change. That's part of the thing with I talk about I don't think football will ever be outlawed. I do think in 50 or 60 years it's not going to be the monolith it is now. I think it will recede. And will controversy play? I don't know about that, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I agree with you, and I feel like we could have a long conversation about that, but I don't know if we would have the exact same points. Yeah.
Chuck, the book, as Matt just alluded to, it covers so much. I mean, it's a pretty fascinating glimpse into your brain and your obsession with football. It covers the NFL, it covers college, video games, gambling, war, Colin Kaepernick. I mean, the list goes on. But one of the things that I found truly fascinating was how you talked about television and how television is such an important component to football. But I think that there's going to be a place in this book where a lot of people disagree with you, especially down here in Alabama, throughout the SEC. But I think it's worth further consideration, especially for them to see your point of view. You're pretty adamant that it's always better on TV than it is in person. The televised experience is just far superior to the in-person experience. You also call football the best television product ever produced. I love also what you said about football fans attending games for many reasons, but one can never be, quote, a desire to see what's really happening, right? And as some of us who have covered the game either in the press box or been on the sideline, I would often text friends during a replay and ask them what's going to happen here, because I have no idea, because I'm watching it from this vantage point. But just from the TV perspective, as somebody who's watched and consumed a lot of television and seen all of these different combinations, who is your favorite college football TV analyst or play-by-play team? Who do you trust the most with telling the story of a game that you really want to watch?
That's okay. It's interesting. I mean, you're right. First of all, there are many, many, many ancillary reasons to go to a football game. I know I'm friends with this writer, probably Wright Thompson.
Yeah.
I mean, he just told me I got to go to an Ole Miss football game and wear a suit and a tie and all these things. But those things really aren't about actually seeing the game. My favorite announcing teams were always Gary Danielson and I suddenly his name is
Vern Lundquist or Brad Nessler?
Vern Lundquist, of course. I'm embarrassed not to know that. Yes, I say Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson. For the longest time, I thought they were the best kind of. It particularly in tandem. They had I thought I liked Gary Danielson. I thought it was interesting that he doesn't believe in momentum, and
Yeah.
Vern just has this the kind of the voice and the delivery, like the kick six game. Actually, I remember that that's just in my memory. So, who else though? I think that Greg Olson is particularly good now as an analyst. I think that he sort of jumped past Romo, who I think at one point we were like, okay, Romo's going to be the future of this, because he's like predicting plays or whatever, and then that sort of people kind of were first fascinated by that Romo could say the play before it happened. Then he was kind of criticized for it, and then people were like, well, it's only because he just retired. Any player who just retired could do it. And now it seems like he is almost kind of fading, like he might not even be doing this in 5 years. I always was a fan of Al Michaels. He's different now. He seems to enjoy doing the job less. But I think for all sports, like across the board, for drop him into a hockey game, drop him into a basketball game, like he might have been the most skilled play-by-play guy. What is interesting, I guess, now I'm just as I'm saying this now, is like I realize how often I now watch football with the sound off, because it's like, okay, so I live on in the Pacific time. Okay, so in Pacific time, the NFL starts at 10 a.m. The college games start at 9 a.m. So if I was a single guy, this would be perfect, right? This would be almost the perfect situation. But I have kids. So the marquee game is at 5 o'clock on a Saturday. 5 o'clock on a Saturday is not a time where I can often watch what's happening on television. There's a lot of things going on. So I tape all these games. I record all these games. And then, I do the stuff with the kids, put the kids to bed. Maybe my wife wants to watch something, so we watch something. She falls asleep, and I've just avoided this game. But I'm watching it in my bedroom, so I don't want to wake her up. So I just have the sound down, and I'm just watching football kind of in silence. So I'm probably, weirdly, for someone who watches as much football as I do, less up on announcing teams than I should be. It's weird. But I don't. I watch a lot of games on mute. I don't know what that means. Because I think some people might hear that and they'll be like, "Oh, you must be like a real tactician," It's like, no. It's like I just know enough to know what's happening. Like I don't need, announcing does help in a lot of ways. In some ways, in that it gives you, particularly if the analyst is really good, it gives you a richer understanding of things. Sometimes it can kind of fill up the slow points in the broadcast. If the back when I was young, and like Pat Summerall and John Madden were at their best when the game was sort of no longer tight, and they would start talking about the cost of peanuts, buying goobers in the 1950s or whatever. You buy a bag of goobers or whatever. That was great. So now if I'm watching the game on mute, it's just well, not much is going on. But I didn't really properly answer that question. But I would say Vernon and Danielson were my favorite for a long time.
You just want all 22 on mute now. That's all you want, right?
Yes. Yeah. Skycam. Yeah.
Well, I think we're running low on time with you, Chuck. I mean, this has been a lot of fun, but I do want to close by asking you this and combining two of your areas of expertise, and I think Matt will appreciate this too. Which band or artist would you compare to Alabama football?
Well, it would. I mean, I know this seems weird because you're wearing the hat, and I already mentioned, but it would be the Rolling Stones, right? I mean, because it would either who is the kind of success over this long period of time without radically reinventing the program. Michigan, I guess, could be kind of like that in a way. I mean, maybe Alabama's like ZZ Top. That could be another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think if you go to the Joyless Murder Ball era, maybe you talk yourself into Metallica. But now, I don't know, in this post-Saban era, and you were referencing the post-Bryant 80s era, it kind of feels like the touring Beach Boys, right? Not quite the same. It's the brand, but not quite the substance, right? You're missing something.
It would be, this is not a great time, I feel like, to be a coach at Alabama or any kind of long-standing premier program, because the ground has shifted so much and the expectation has not really changed at all. So you're trying to live up to the standard of the past in this completely new reality, and it's going to be tough. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank my colleague and AL.com writer Matt Wake, but Football by Chuck Klosterman releases January 20th. If you love this ridiculous game, you must check it out. I think Alabama fans in particular are going to get a huge kick out of it. Sir, you're a master of your craft. It's an honor to talk to you. On behalf of Matt and myself, thank you so much for spending time with us, and good luck with the book.
Thanks for having me, man.